welcome to Terrence's Classic Rock Corner podcast.
Nice touch.
On this particular show, I talk about classic rock albums that either had an impact on my life, or rock music in general, or both. And be rest assured, there's no country or rap nonsense to be found here.
Nice touch.
So welcome to Terrence's Classic Rock Corner podcast.
Nice touch.
Welcome back, my friends, to the podcast that never ends. The boss is back again. It's the classic rock brainiac, Terrence Reardon, on Terrence's Classic Rock Corner podcast. Today on this fine show, I'm going to be talking about a band that is hated, detested, loathed, just as much as those clowns loathe me. The critics loathe this band that I actually happen to love. And Paul Stanley of Kiss said the critics loved them. Last I checked, the critics hated the band I'm about to talk about. And Paul Stanley forgets he's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and this band isn't. And this band should have been in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as of 1996 or 95. But no, the American critics hated this band. Three wise men of progressive rock, known as Keith Emerson, Greg Lake, may they lay in peace, and Carl Palmer, a.k.a. Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, in their 1973 masterpiece, Brain Salad Surgery. Emerson, Lake and Palmer's fourth studio album, their fifth overall in 2 years, Brain Salad Surgery, was released in late November 1973. Some say December 1973. Here in America, it was November 1973. Because the band was touring in the States at the time, so according to Billboard magazine, it was November 1973. And many booklets that came with reissues, it says November 1973. So I'm going with that, not using the site that's run by left-wing pieces of shyster. So Brain Salad Surgery was Emerson, Lake and Palmer's fourth studio album. After their self-titled debut, which was released in late 1970 in the UK, January 71 here in the States, a top 20 classic here in America. Great album. I will talk about that album in the future. Tarkus, which went to number 1 in the UK, top 10 here in America. Pictures at an Exhibition in early 72 here in the States, top 10. In Trilogy, which I did as an episode on my old show, which I'll re-air at some stage in the future, that was a top 5 album. So Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which was the late Keith Emerson from the band The Nice, bass player, singer, guitarist Greg Lake, may he too lay in peace. He came from King Crimson and sang on their inaugural masterpiece In the Court of the Crimson King. And the wonderful wonderkind dynamo drummer Carl Palmer, who, thank the good Lord, is still with us at 73, alive and kicking some Riconic ass on those drums of his. He came from the crazy world of Arthur Brown and Atomic Rooster. So Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, by 1973, were on par with some of the biggest bands in the world. The Rolling Stones, The Who, Led Zeppelin, and they were primed and ready, as 1973 was the year of progressive rock, which was at its peak, because in 72 you had Jethro Tull, Thick as a Brick hit number 1, Seven Sojourn by the Moody Blues hit number 1, Fragile and Close to the Edge by Yes hit the top 5. Pink Floyd gave us their first top 50 album with Obscured by Clouds. Then in 1973, hit Pater with the Dark Side of the Moon, which was their first number 1 album here in the States. I've already discussed Dark Side of the Moon. Genesis would have their breakthrough album Selling England by the Pound once they signed with Charisma here in the States, which was ironically enough distributed by Atlantic, which they were label mates with ELP for a while here in the States. So both ELP and Genesis were on Atlantic, although subsidiaries of Atlantic, they were both on Atlantic at the time. So by 1973, progressive rock was at its pinnacle, and the three men that helped launch it, Emerson, Lake, and Palmer, were riding high with the success of Trilogy. And the band decided to continue touring throughout Europe in early 73 and previewing some songs that were to be recorded and readied for the Brain Salad Surgery album. Those were The First Impression of Carnival 9, Still You Turn Me On, and I think Toccata was played. I'll have to look up their history, but I know those three were first performed and tooled well before the album was recorded. So the band were riding high with success, but they were dealing with dissatisfaction with Atlantic Records here in the States, apparently. So the band decided to form their own record label called Manticore, named after the half-man, half-lion, part lion, part man, part scorpion beast that appeared on the Tarkus album. And it's an actual creature in mythology. And then the band also bought an old cinema in London and turned it into a rehearsal studio where bands would rehearse there, including Led Zeppelin, before they went on their infamous, ill-fated North American tour, which ended in disaster in 1977. And then the band also, like I said, created their own record label, Manticore Records. And their Atlantic Records promoter, Mario Medius, was brought in to serve as the president of Manticore. So the band had their own record label. This was before Led Zeppelin would have their own record label, but the Beatles had Apple, the Rolling Stones had Rolling Stones Records. Now ELP had Manticore. And then, of course, you'd have Led Zeppelin with Swan Song, Madonna with Maverick. Trying to think who else have their own record labels. Pink Floyd with Pink Floyd Records. Now David Gilmour has DGR, which is David Gilmour Records. Oh my goodness. So a lot of bands created their own record labels. So by the beginning of 1973, Emerson, Lake and Palmer were previewing a number of different songs live during the 1973 European tour. So when that tour was finished, the band decided to go record the new material at a place called Olympic Studios. And they began recording in June 1973 at Olympic Studios with engineer Chris Kimsey, who worked with the Rolling Stones on Sticky Fingers. He, of course, would engineer Peter Frampton's blockbuster Frampton Comes Alive. And then he would do the Rolling Stones' Some Girls, Emotional Rescue, Tattoo You, Undercover, which, yeah, I do enjoy that album. Steel Wheel's another great album. The Live Flashpoint. So Chris Kimsey would go on to have a track record working with the Stones. But when he wasn't working with the Stones, he was working with ELP, especially on Brain Salad Surgery, for one part of the album. So they recorded one of the parts to Carnival 9 with Chris. And then after that session was finished, the band decided to go record some more with a different engineer, Jeff Young, at Vision Studios, where they had recorded their 3 previous studio albums, self-titled, Tarkus, and Trilogy. So the band, by September 1973, had their new material ready to go. And they also had an album cover already in the can. You see, on the original vinyl album, a skull skewed in some medieval torture vice opened itself. You opened that up, and it revealed the face of an exotic ancient pharaoh queen with Sophia Loren lips. And what happened was, during the European tour, Keith Emerson was called to H.R. Geiger's place. The Swiss painter, who was a big fan of the band, was like, "Oh, Keith, please come to my place. I think I've got some album covers for you guys for potential." And Keith's like, "All right, mate." He's like, "Wow, I love all this artwork. I better bring Greg and Carl over." And Greg Lake said that Geiger's place looked like a horror movie. It was all this death and skulls and unborn fetuses. And, of course, everyone knows that Geiger would go on to create the scenario for the film Alien. He designed those creatures that appeared in the Alien movie. And one of the strangest dichotomies is Geiger may have been painting evil, sick, demonic paintings, but he was a kind-hearted human being. And when Greg Lake first met him, he thought he was going to meet someone that was possessed by Satan himself. But H.R. Geiger was like, "How do you do? Nice to meet you guys." And Greg's like, "Sheesh, I can't believe this guy's a gentleman. I thought he was going to be a monster." But, you know, the skull and the skewered in the medieval torture vice had the lips of the Pharaoh Queen with what appears to be a shaft of light, but it actually turned out to be originally a phallus. Yeah, that was actually a phallus. A schlong. I can say it because the odd profanity is allowed. Penis. And the original title of the album was going to be Whip Some Skull on You. But Mario Medius at Manicore said, "Guys, that title's not good for that. Change it to, Dr. John just had a hit with Right Place, Wrong Time. Change the title to Brain Salad Surgery. I gotta get me some brain salad surgery." And the guys are like, "What does that mean, brain salad surgery?" "It means the same damn thing as Whip Some Skull on You." Like, oh, bloody hell. So they had a problem with the album title because Atlantic complained. And then they complained about the album cover. And then Keith, it was like, Carl Geiger, they won't release the record. You gotta get rid of the schlong there. No, this schlong stays on the cover. No, we can't release the bloody thing. So they had to turn it into a shaft of light. But if you had the vinyl record, this is a little funny story. If you have the vinyl record, the where you put the hole in the middle, it goes to the woman's lips anyway. Pure rock and roll, pure perversion, but one of the greatest album covers known to mankind. Then, of course, came with a poster which featured pictures of the three principal members of ELP with their heads stuck in between the skull, skewered in the medieval torture vice. And then it opens to have the lyrics and the credits. And the album, like I said, just an amazing album. And my backstory with this album was through two different sources. One source was the box set of the Atlantic Years compilation from 1992, which was on 2 CDs. So you got the majority of this album with the exception of one track. So you got everything but one track on there. And my other introduction was via In the Studio with Redbeard, which spotlighted the making of the album. That's how I got all this info about the stories I just told you. Everyone's like, "Well, what do you mean, In the Studio with Redbeard?" I'm like, that was the actual interview that I based this my research on. And when I first heard this album, I want to shout out to Bob Whitty, if you're listening out there, brother. Thanks for getting me hooked on ELP proper, and I want to thank the Bearded One, Redbeard, for spotlighting this album because it opened the door into my brain for ELP. This was November 96. So I went off on a whim to buy Brain Salad Surgery on CD. So this was actually the first Emerson, Lake and Palmer album I owned on CD. And I learned with the Rhino CD that ELP were the most hated band by critics. So much for Paul Stanley saying the critics loved ELP. Critics detested ELP, but made people like me love them more. Then again, Kiss are in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. ELP still continues to get shafted. But Brain Salad Surgery, what a phenomenal record. I've had it on just about every format, I think with the exception of 8-track cartridge, because I've had the CD, I have the vinyl, had it on cassette at one point, and looking at this darn thing, this album was just top to bottom perfection. And what do I think of the songs? Well, I think I'll tell you my love fest for all these tunes right this second. We begin proceedings with their take on the Old English hymn, Jerusalem. Lyrics by William Blake and something Parry wrote the music, arranged by ELP. And this song was second only to God Save the Queen as the British national anthem. And the band wanted to release it as a single, but the BBC threw a holy stink. No, don't release that bloody track as a single. You're bastardizing the runner-up national anthem to God Save the Queen, you wankers. Oh my goodness, the guys in ELP are like, sheesh, what's wrong here? And listening to this song, I think ELP did the definitive version, beginning with Keith Emerson using his Hammond organ and custom-built Moog synthesizers, including the Moog Polyphonic, which makes its debut on this album. And of course, the band just playing their hearts out, with Greg Lake singing, "And did those feet in ancient times walk up on England's mountains green, and was the holy Lamb of God on England's pleasant pasture scene, and did the countenance divine with the bell dong shine forth upon our clouded hills," with the timpani from Carl Palmer, "and was Jerusalem with the gong builded here among these dark satanic mills." Da da dun 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 dun. Oh my goodness, what a killer riff. Bring me my bow of burning gold. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spirit. Oh my goodness. That synthesizer playing from Keith Emerson. And Greg Lake's baritone. He was one of the greatest singers in history. It's a damn shame he passed away. Bring me my arrows of desire. Bring me my spear. O clouds unfold. Bring me my chariot of fire. I will not cease from mental flight, nor shall my sword sleep in my hand, till we have built Jerusalem in England's green and pleasant land. Him singing to end with the pleasant land. Him ending with that deep note, because he double tracked the vocals. How I know this is because you have another vocal track going, green and pleasant land. So it's two Greg Lakes singing on the track. I didn't know that until I listened to a fold down of the surround sound mix. I'm like, wow, I didn't know this. Because I had a CD of it with a different mix of the album. I was like, sheesh. I know that Greg harmonized with himself singing two vocal parts. And this song, along with the rest of the album, was performed live on the subsequent Brain Salad Surgery tour. And sadly, the song was not ever released as a single. Was supposed to be, but the British branch of Atlantic and the BBC raised a holy stink about it. But we Yankees, I think, could have pulled it off releasing it as a single. But Jerusalem, amazing way to begin the album. Not much more I can add. It was played on every show on the Brain Salad Surgery tour. It's been on many compilations, including the aforementioned Atlantic years. It was also on the Return of the Manicore box set in the Emerson, Lake and Palmer anthology. Amazing opening track, killer track, not much more I can add. Now we get to Toccata, the first instrumental on the album, which was an adaptation of Ginastera's first piano concerto, fourth movement, arranged by Keith Emerson with percussion movement by Carl Palmer, which begins with Keith Emerson going bum 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 bum, and Carl Palmer's timpani swelling bum 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 ba-dum, ba-dum. Oh my goodness. Into this amazing instrumental that just takes you on a journey for about 7 minutes. And yeah, they were the band that could take classical music, put it through Hammond organs and synthesizers, and make it rock and roll and killer. I don't know what the hell the hang-up was with the Hall of Fame is, oh, rock and roll's roots were not in classical music. Pardon my language, that's bullshit. ELP proved that rock and roll's roots was in classical music. Not just the blues, not just country, but classical music. Because think about it. If Beethoven and Mozart came out in the 20th century, they would have been considered heavy metal. And in metal, a lot of the musical roots in metal came from classical music. The Devil's Third, classical. I took music theory for many years, so I learned that rock and roll's roots wasn't classical music. So much for these morons who run the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Oh, it came from the blues. No, it came from classical music, you retards. Yeah. In this piece, Greg Lake just playing that Fender Precision bass like he was possessed. Keith Emerson playing those keyboards, the various different keyboards. Carl Palmer on percussion, drums with the tempo blocks, and then going. Although he's Ludwig's in the album, he would switch over to Gretsch, to Gretsch drums for stainless steel drums for the subsequent tour. And looking at the instrumental, this instrumental just, oh my goodness, and the synthesizers start going completely spastic, and then it goes into this timpani percussion movement by Carl Palmer where he's just beating the hell out of those two timpanis and wailing on two gongs simultaneously. It's just badass what he does. And tubular bells, the dong 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 dong, bum 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 bum, and then Keith Emerson does a little tiny piano thing. And then Greg Lake switches over to his electric 6 strings Amadeus electric guitar to go do do ding, with synthesizers and guitars both playing together as an orchestra. Oh my goodness, you'd be singing the melody for days on end. And then after a bit, Carl Palmer goes to his drum kit in the first use of electronic drums. This was years before Syn drums came into play, years before the Simmons pad, the Roland pads. Carl Palmer was an innovator with electronic percussion. And they had, in the modulators that they created, it had to be controlled by a foot switch, which made the drums go boing, and it was hitting the acoustic drums, but it had triggers inside the drums. Oh my goodness. And Carl Palmer hitting every drum in his path with that 11-piece drum kit, and he only used one bass drum. How do you like those marbles? To all those speed metal drummers who had to use 2 bass drums. Carl only needed 1 back in ELP's prime. Plus he played a drum kit that was huge. That was a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11-piece drum kit. And all the cymbals were from Paiste. Gretsch drums, Paiste cymbals, drums made of stainless steel. And the percussion section, and he had a octave box that would make the drums go either higher or lower. Oh my goodness, if you've heard it. In fact, they did play this live on the Brain Salad Surgery tour, every show on that tour. And there's footage from Cal Jam where, they played it live, and Carl Palmer just hitting all the drums in his path with the earliest use of electronic drums. This was years before Syn drums were invented, the Simmons pads, and then a repeat of the da-da-da-da. Oh my goodness. The song, this instrumental, one of the best instrumentals, and even Alberto Ginastera said about this piece, quote, Keith Emerson has perfectly caught the mood of my piece, end quote. And the band were kind of nervous about releasing it because fearing that, what's his name, Ginastera wouldn't like it. The band had to fly to Switzerland to play it, or Keith had to play the rough mix, and Ginastera's like, oh, diabolical. And he's like, what does that mean? It's great. Okay. So they release it, and the rest, as they say, is history. The live version appears on the Atlantic Years compilation. Studio version's on Return of the Manicore. And the live version's also on Emerson, Lake and Palmer Anthology. And the live version appears on the subsequent live album, Welcome Back, My Friends, to the Show That Never Ends, as did the previous track, which were played back-to-back on the subsequent tour. Toccata, adaptation of Ginastera's first piano concerto, 4th movement. Amazing. Killer. Ass-kicking. Awesome. Now we come to Greg Lake's acoustic ballad, Still You Turn Me On, which was released as a promotional single here in the States, but the band decided against releasing it as a proper single here in the States because they did not want to be pigeonholed as a band that did acoustic numbers. Like Lucky Man on the first album and From the Beginning on the previous album, Trilogy, Still You Turn Me On was another Greg Lake acoustic ballad which crossed over the band into mainstream success. And the song was, to, like I said, to be released as a single, but Atlantic wanted to release it, but the band said, no way, Jose. We're not releasing it. We don't want to be labeled as us, an acoustic act. We're more than just acoustic pieces. And this song, beautiful ballad. And as I read these lyrics here from the poster that came with the record here, as I don't want to rip this damn thing. Hang on, because the CD doesn't come with the lyrics. Reading from the poster that came with the record. Here's the lyrics. Do you want to be an angel? Do you want to be a star? Do you want to play some magic on my guitar? Do you want to be a poet? Do you want to be my string? You could be anything. Do you want to be the lover of another? Undercover, you could even be the man on the moon. Do you want to be the player? Do you want to be the string? Let me tell you something that just don't mean a thing. You see, it really doesn't matter when you're buried in disguise by the dark glass in your eyes. Though your flesh is crystallized, still you turn me on. With Greg Lake on acoustic and electric and bass guitar on this track. Still you turn me on. Oh my goodness. With the wah-wah guitar. He's playing the wah-wah electric guitar, bass guitar, and the acoustic guitar. And Keith Emerson on keyboards on this track. Carl Palmer taking a break. Then, do you want to be the pillow where I lay my head? Do you want to be the flowers? Do you want to be the feathers lying in my bed? Do you want to be the cover magazine, create a scene every day, a little sadder, a little madder, someone get me a ladder? Do you want to be the singer? Do you want to be the song? Let me tell you something. You just couldn't be more wrong. You see, I really have to tell you that all gets so intense from my experience. It just doesn't seem to make sense. Still, you turn me on. Although the song wasn't released as a single, the band thought highly enough to play it on many tours over the years. They played it on the Brain Salad Surgery tour as one of the parts of Take a Pebble, because they would play the first half of Take a Pebble, then Greg Lake would come out with his Zematis 12-string acoustic and do Still You Turn Me On by himself on 12-string acoustic guitar with just playing the singing beautifully. Perfect example is caught on the concert, the live footage from Cal Jam 74 and the live version on Welcome Back, My Friends, the Show That Never Ends live album. And of course they played it live on the orchestral leg of the Works tour, live performance I heard from Madison Square Garden with orchestra. Amazing. An amazing song. I love it. It's a beautiful ballad. It would have been a big hit, but the band stuck to their guns of not wanting to be pigeonholed as a balladeer band. And then they played the song live again on their 1992 Black Moon tour. Live version appears on the home video version of what's that concert? Oh yeah, the Live at the Royal Albert Hall concert film. It's not on the live album, but it's on the concert video. But Still You Turn Me On, the song turns me on. It turns on a lot of people. And the song was also on the Atlantic Years compilation, also on Welcome Back, My Friends, and also on Emerson Lake and Palmer anthology. And I believe it was also on, the Best of Emerson Lake and Palmer compilation. The various best ofs that were released over the years. But Still You Turn Me On, great song. Sad it was not ever released as a single, but sometimes, unfortunately, that's sort of what happens. But great song, nevertheless. And then it ends kind of with a little tribute to I Who Have Nothing. I love you, da-da-dang. Oh my goodness. You turn me on, da-da-dang. I'm like, oh my goodness. Do you think they nicked from the Pax I Who Have version of I Who Have Nothing? Although I don't think they have, which had a pre-Grand Funk Railroad Mark Farner and Don Brewer in the band. You be the judge. Yeah, people borrow from everybody, but you didn't see the Grand Funk guys go after ELP here in the ending of Still You Turn Me On. They were kind of laid back, unlike the dudes in Spirit, who were just butthurt that Led Zeppelin were bigger than they were. But I digress. Now we go from Still You Turn Me On beautiful tune to the last short song in the album, a hilarious tune called Benny the Bouncer. Like in the tradition of the Sheriff on the previous album and Are You Ready, Eddie on the album before that, this is a funny, hilarious song with Keith Emerson using his Pauly Moog synthesizer and honky-tonk piano, or tack piano, to create this thing with Greg Lake singing in a Cockney British accent. Benny was the bouncer at the Palais de Danse. He'd slash your granny's face given half a chance, or half a chance, as they say in England. He'd sell you back the pieces all for less than half a quid, or a few pennies in American jargon. He thought he was the meanest until he met with Savage Sid. Now Sidney was a greaser with some nasty roots. He poured a pint of Guinness over Benny's boots. Benny looked at Sidney. Sidney stared right back in his eye. Sidney chose a switchblade and Benny got a cold meat pie. Oh, what a terrible sight. Much to the people's delight, one hell of a fight. Then a honky-tonk piano solo. Sounded like a bar fight going on. Kind of like a honky-tonk thing. You could imagine watching a Western and the bar fights going on. Oh, man. Classic. Sidney grabbed a hatchet, buried it in Benny's head. The people gasped as he bled. The end of its head, while they dragged him from the wreckage of the palais in bits. They tried to stick together all the bits that would fit, but some of him was missing, and part of him arrived too late, so now he works for Jesus as the bouncer at St. Peter's Gate. Yeah, Greg Lake wrote these lyrics, but hilarious. Shows you he has a sense of humor. Some progressive rock bands didn't have a sense of humor. The guys in ELP did have a sense of humor. Those who said ELP had no sense of humor, jump off a bridge, will you? And Benny, and yeah, Pete Sinfield of King Crimson fame co-wrote the lyrics with Greg. And the lesson of the song is the classic old adage of the bigger they come, the harder they fall. And you're wondering, did they ever play the song live? Well, the answer is yes, they did. On the Brain Salad Surgery Tour, the 1973, and part of the 1974 leg, they played it as well. But what a hilarious song. I know a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's great. I think it's hilarious. Those who don't like it, you have no sense of humor. And you don't make sense either. But I'm one schmuck who thinks the song is hilarious. Benny the Bouncer for the win. Now we come to the album's centerpiece. The main attraction of this album, which took up 29 minutes of the album. It began at the end of side 1 and carried on through all of side 2. Carn Evil 9. Which, the first movement was the beginning with the first impression, which starts at the end of side 1 and carries on into side 2. And it begins in the key of A flat minor. And the band just jamming. Cold and misty morning, I heard a warning born in the air, about an age of power where no one had an hour to spare, where the seeds have withered, silent children shivered in the cold, now their faces captured in the lenses of the jackals for gold. I'll be there, I will be there. The band just jamming out, suffering in silence, they've all been betrayed. They hurt them and they beat them in a terrible way, praying for survival at the end of the day. There's no compassion for those who stay. I'll be there, I will be there. Then an amazing keyboard solo played by Keith Emerson, of course, where the band's just rocking out the oh my goodness. And it's just, and this was actually the first, and they actually previewed this song before the rest of, before they recorded it. So by the time they recorded it in the studio, they had it perfected. Then after that, they go into this, there must be someone who can set them free, to take their sorrow from this odyssey, to help the helpless and the refugee, to protect what's left of humanity. Can't you see, can't you see, can't you see, yeah, I'll be there, I will be there. To heal their sorrow, to beg and borrow, fight tomorrow. On the studio version, that section's in A flat minor. When they played it live on the Brain Salad Surgery Tour, they had to play that whole part in F minor, because Greg Lake had to conserve his singing voice. You're like, he did that? I'm like, yeah, he most certainly did. Reason he had to conserve his singing voice is because he didn't want to throw out his vocal cords. Because during the trilogy tour, there were shows where he did put his voice through the ringer on some songs, and he blew out his voice. So for this track, they decided to lower the key by a few steps, from A flat minor to F minor, and it worked out great. Live version you can hear on Welcome Back My Friends, which I'll talk about that live album in just a bit. But yeah, they played the song on every show of the Brain Salad Surgery Tour. Sadly, there's no footage of them playing it, but there's plenty of bootlegs on YouTube for you to hear, so check one out. And or listen to the live Welcome Back My Friends album, and you'll catch my drift. Then it goes into the do-do-do-do-do-do-do. It goes from that, A flat minor on the album to A minor to A flat natural. And then live it went from F minor to F, then to F sharp, then to A, then to A flat, because they, I had to do key changes, and then jamming on the do 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 do, and then of course the band just kicks in. Step inside, hello, we have the most amazing show. You'll enjoy it. All we know. Step inside, step inside. We got thrills and shocks, which on the song, the music is cut out when Greg sings shocks. Live, there's no music dropout. It's right there. And it's actually present on the multi-track of the album. We got Thrills and Shocks, Supersonic Fighting Cocks, as in roosters. Leave your hammers at the box, come inside, roll up, see the show. So basically this is like a futuristic carnival where you find all these weird, gruesome things. And the First Impressions lyrics were written by Greg Lake himself. Reading this. Left behind them bars, rows of bishop's head in jars, and a bomb inside a car. Spectacular, If you follow me, there's a speciality, some tears for you to see. Misery. Roll up, see the show. And then the organ, vroom, 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 vroom. Next upon the bill in a house of vaudeville, we have a stripper in a till. What a thrill. And not content with that, with our hands behind our backs, we pull Jesus from a hat. Get into that. Roll up, see the show. And then on the studio version, it goes into the guitar solo. But live, Greg Lake had to switch from bass guitar to 6-string electric guitar. So Carl Palmer had to do a full extra drum fill, some extra drumming, so the change in instruments could occur for Greg. And then as Greg strapped on the guitar, Keith hit a Hammond organ chord going on organ swell, then into the guitar solo. And Keith Emerson doing the bass part on a synthesizer as he's playing one mini Moog with a bass part, and then the other synthesizer he was playing the high notes with a what do you call it? The high notes with the Hammond organ. And Greg Lake doing that amazing guitar solo. Just killing it. And on the vinyl record, the song fades. After the first guitar solo, the song fades into the black hole of the end of side 1. With the synthesizer going, it just fades out. Luckily, they wound up fixing that for the CD, so it just doesn't fade. It just continues on. So on the vinyl record, you had to, or the cassette, you had to go flip the album over, flip the cassette over to side 2, and we resume Carnival 9 First Impression Part 2 with Greg Lake saying those immortal words, "Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. We're so glad you could attend. Come inside, or step inside, depending on which performance. There behind a glass is a real blade of grass. Be careful as you pass. Move along. Come inside. The show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. You got to see the show. It's a dynamo. You got to see the show. It's rock and roll. Right before your eyes. Oh yeah, come inside. The show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. Rest assured, you go get your money's worth. The greatest show in heaven, hell, or earth. You got to see the show. It's dynamo. You got to see the show. It's rock and roll. I forgot that verse. Right before your eyes, we pull laughter from the skies, and he laughs into till he cries, then he dies, and he dies. Come inside, the show's about to start. Guaranteed to blow your head apart. You got to see the show, it's a dynamo. You got to see the show, it's a rock and roll. And then Greg Lake's guitar part coming in, the and then Keith Emerson doing a great organ solo, knocking out of the ballpark. Then Greg Lake does a guitar solo, repeated the guitar solo at the end of the earlier in the first impression. Oh my goodness. And then on the album, it goes into the next verse, but live, after the guitar solo, it went into a 5-minute drum solo from Carl Palmer, which he hit every drum in his path, including a church bell that hung above his drum kit, which he gnawed with his teeth. Watch Cal Jam, you'll know what the hell I'm talking about. You're like, holy, pardon my language, shit. Carl is one mamma jamma behind that drum kit. I can say mamma jamma, can't I? Yeah, of course I can. And he just beat those drums like no tomorrow. Then Greg Lake comes back in with one of the last verses. Soon the Gypsy Queen and a glaze of Vaseline will perform on Guillotine. What a scene, what a scene. Next upon the stand, will you please extend a hand to Alexander's Ragtime Band, Dixieland, Dixieland. With great Keith playing a little Dixieland Tiger Rag overdub. Roll up, roll up, roll up, see the show. And then performing on a stool, we have a sight to make you drool. 7 virgins and a mule, keep it cool, keep it cool. The 7 virgins and a mule line I like to use nowadays because it makes me think of those Islamic buggers known as Hamas, who are promised the 7 virgins and a mule if they do those horrific suicide bombings, suicide killings, in taking parts of the Quran and twisting into their twisted ideology. All we kill for Allah. We get our 7 virgins and mules. Shala shala. Sheesh. I have to have a sense of humor because if you don't, what good would life be? We'd like it to be known that the exhibits that were shown were exclusively our own, all our own, all our own. Come and see the show, come and see the show, come and see the show. Then Keith Emerson's synthesizer solo do from earlier in the thing playing again. Then Greg Lake and the band just ending with a dun dun. See the show. And the synthesizer doing the octave leaps, and Greg and Carl hitting the thing, and Keith hitting the Hammond organ. The band just jamming out. And this section was played live, was continued to be played live until the very end. And Greg Lake even played it live on his 1981 solo tour with Gary Moore, and he played the part on his 8-string alembic bass guitar as Gary Moore rocked out the guitar. And he upped the key from A flat to A when he did it solo on that 1981 tour. And then when ELP reunited in 92, they lowered the section from A flat to G. And Greg Lake playing electric guitar in the 1992-93 performances, then as of 98, went to bass guitar. It sounds better with him playing the electric guitar because it gives it that more of that bludgeoning hard rock feel. And like I said, they played this section, the whole first impression. Actually, they played the second impression part 2 in live performances in 77 on the Works tour. So Greg Lake would play the first half on the electric guitar, 6-string electric, then switch over to his 8-string alembic bass from Soon the Gypsy Queen and a Glaze of Vaseline. And of course, on the Brain Salad Surgery tour, he started with his Gibson bass, then went to the Zemaitis from the section to welcome, and the Welcome Back, My Friends, to up to where the drum solo was, and then strapped on back on his Gibson bass guitar for the latter part of the piece. But Carnival 9 first impression impressed me on first listen, and this impression makes a lasting impression. In fact, it does appear on the Emerson Lake and Palmer 3-CD anthology. That's how high the band thinks of this track. They think of it that greatly. Now we come to the second impression of Carnival 9, which begins with Carl Palmer doing some drum doodling into an amazing jazz piece with Keith Emerson playing that grand piano the only way he knew how. Fast and furious and it was kind of like hearing a jazz trio done in a rock and roll context, with Keith just going dun 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 dun, Greg Lake and Carl Palmer just playing those drums like a jazz master would, in the honor or in the tradition of his buddy, good old Buddy Rich. In fact, yeah, I can share this. Carl Palmer was a great friend of Buddy Rich, the infamous jazz drummer who was a hothead. But Carl Palmer, more luckily, was not ill-tempered, unlike his friend Buddy. And Buddy said there was only two rock drummers he held in high regard, Carl Palmer and Danny Serafin of Chicago. And both men played traditional grip, unlike the match grip that most rock stars played. But yeah, Carl Palmer was still playing, doing the fills that he normally does with that big drum kit of his. Keith Emerson just playing the piano amazingly, especially when it goes into the into this section in C sharp, which is dun dun dun. I don't know how the hell Keith Emerson, for the longest time, didn't get carpal tunnel syndrome until years later, but he had an amazing left hand, and that left hand was going dun 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 on the piano, and then on top of his piano was a mini Moog synthesizer pitched to sound like Caribbean steel drums. It sounds like you're in Jamaica or the Bahamas or one of those places. It's kind of like Calypso meets Charlie Parker meets Calypso, or Miles Davis meets Calypso. As Greg Lake anchored playing on the bass, and then Carl Palmer going boom 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 boom, and Keith just showing the world why he was one of the greatest keyboard players in rock. Even the great Dennis DeYoung of Styx held Keith in the highest regards. Name him as one of his all-time favorite keyboard players. And sadly, Keith passed away, as we all know. I'll talk about that at the end of the review to bring us up to date. But in this section, which was written by Keith Emerson himself, the band's just jamming away, then it stops cold, and then it goes into somewhere else, kind of like you're hearing a piano concerto. And you're like, sheesh, is this soft classical music? Then all of a sudden, Greg Lake adds some bass guitar going, gong, gong, gong. So you're like, oh my goodness, these guys knew how to throw curveballs here. And then into this section of the oh my goodness. And just building an intensity, and an intensity, even more intensity. And the band just played it amazingly. And then all of a sudden it goes into this section in A flat, alternating with B flat. And then all of a sudden the band just comes back in, jamming away with all this Fast and Furious stuff, which was just boom, dun, 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 dun. Sounds like you're at a gospel revival with the drums going dun, dun, dun. You're like, hallelujah. Oh my God. I enjoy this stuff. You know why? Because it's interesting, and yeah, it proves my theory that rock and roll's roots came from classical and jazz, not just blues, but classical music. And Keith Emerson was a fan of the classics, but he was not classically trained. He was self-taught, and this piece proved he could write in any genre thrown at him. Keith Emerson, one of the greatest keyboard players that ever walked the face of the earth, and if he were alive today, he'd be happy hearing me say that. As I read this darn thing, this poster that came with the record. So after Carnival 9 second impression is finished, we go to the third impression, which begins with Greg Lake's fuzz box bass guitar going bling, and percussion from Carl, the synthesizers of Keith, into the third impression, which basically foresaw what the hell's going on now, the battle between man and machine. who would have thunk this song, this section here would be prophetic? I didn't say pathetic, but prophetic. But my God, do I love this. And again, Pete Sinfield co-wrote the lyrics with Greg Lake. Greg Lake wrote the lyrics in the first impression. The third impression was Pete Sinfield. Man alone, born of stone, will stamp at the dust of time. His hands strike the flame of his soul, ties a rope to a tree, and hangs the universe until the wind of laughter blows cold. Fear that rattles in men's ears and rears its ugly head. Rears its hideous head, Dread, death in the wind. Second verse, man of steel, pray and kneel with fever's blaze and torch thrust into the face of the night, draws a blade of compassion kissed by countless kings whose jeweled trumpet words blind his sight. Walls that no man thought would fall, the affairs of the just crushed dust in the wind. Do you think maybe Kerry Livgren got the quote from this song to name the song on Point of No Return Dust in the Wind, or Bill and Ted, all we are, dude, is dust in the wind? Socrates, Socrates, whatever you call him. I call him Socrates. Sounds much better. Oh, it's not Socrates, it's Socrates. Hush. It's not infamous, it's infamous. Who gives a rat's ass? I like to say things to be a little standout from the crowd. I digress. Back to Carnival 9, third impression. That first section was in A flat. When they had to play it live on the subsequent Brain Salad Surgery tour, they had to lower the key to F, so Greg Lake would not throw his vocal cords out. God bless ELP for that. And then the section which is in F on the album was lowered to D in the live version, which is this section. No man yields who flies in my ship. Now I know he's saying flies in my ship. Until I read the lyrics, I thought he was saying, I apologize for using this word, flies in my shit. I thought he said that. Until I read these lyrics, I'm like, oh, it's flies in my ship. Duh. Shows you how clueless I can be. And then Keith Emerson began using, years before everyone jumped on the vocoder bandwagon, he does the voice of the computer with a synthesizer. This was years before TalkBox. Joe Walsh had done Rocky Mountain Way with a TalkBox, but Keith Emerson was using a vocoder. Years before vocoders became famous. Danger! Let the bridge computer speak. Stranger! And then this line became very prophetic for computer programs that are out today. The line, load your program, I am yourself. Who knew that ELP 50 years ago had a crystal ball saying that computers would overtake society? The world run by computers. It's become, it's basically become a reality. Everyone's like, yeah, right. Computers didn't take over. They're just, this song's going to be dated. No, this song is more relevant now than it was in 1973, especially that quote. And then Greg Lake, no computer stands in my way. Only blood can cancel my pain. Guardians of a nuclear dawn. He screams it as to the highest of his voice, which is a B flat, because he has that rich baritone, and he wasn't known for screaming high. On the album, he screams it in B flat. Live, it was done in G because they did the section in C instead of E flat. Let the maps of war be drawn. Then into the Polymoog synth solo. That section, the band is just jamming away amazingly, brilliantly in the key of A flat. Live, it was F because, again, Greg Lake's voice didn't want to get thrown out and blown out from singing excessively and pushing his vocal cords too high. So that's why they lowered it, to a key where he could sing it live. And then it goes into the diddlin, 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 as the organ is doing that, and then all of a sudden goes into this jam section in B minor. Oh my goodness. ELP could jam. I mean, these guys were they were progressive rock, but progressive rock with testicular fortitude. That's a phrase I can get away with using. Yeah, Mick Foley, WWE, coined that phrase. And then the band just going. I'm singing the damn thing because it's so catchy and memorable. And then all of a sudden, bum bum from Carl Palmer with a timpani. And then into this section, which is in one key in the studio version, and in live it was dropped a whole step and a half, or several keys to F or C or whatever. Dun 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 da 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 da. That section, and all I could think of listening to this synthesizer thing was the possession scene in The Exorcist, where the demon encounters. The demon-possessed Reagan encounters the demon Pazuzu. You're like, what the? I try watching that. It's very creepy and trippy. But then again, both things came out relatively simultaneously. As Keith Emerson's holding that organ with one hand and then doing the with the other synthesizer perched on top of his Hammond organ, where he's hitting chords in the organ. And then all of a sudden, just the band going back into the key of F minor, or F, and then live it was back into the key of D. Dun, dun, Carl Palmer doing some batty drumming. All of a sudden into the final section, the final bit of lyrics, which says this. Rejoice, glory is ours. Our young men have not died in vain. Their graves need no flowers. The tapes have recorded their names. Change the tapes to iPhones, cell phones, or computer chips, or eye in the sky surveillance have recorded the names. Change tapes to phones or tracking devices. They've recorded the names. That's the only lyric that's dated here, but technology has come a long way. And then all of a sudden, Greg Lake singing I Am All There Is, and then Keith Emerson with the vocoder, negative, primitive, limited, I Let You Live, and then Greg Lake screaming, but I give you life. And then Keith, what else could you do? And then Greg would scream to do what was right. And then Keith with the vocoder going, I am perfect, are you? And then all of a sudden it jams into the end where it ends in the key of F sharp 7th. Live it was done in the key of E flat. Instead of Greg Lake going, but I gave you life to do what was right. Like on the album, he had to do it in a lower, like 3 pitches lower. But I give you life. What else would you? To do what was right. I'm perfect. Are you? And the song ends in the live version in F sharp or E flat 7. On the studio version, it's F sharp 7. And then all of a sudden, the synthesizer, I think it was the Moog synthesizer program to go, and it's, goes slow, then it builds up into fast. On the album, it ends in the sequence is in F. Live, it was in D. And it goes from slow to fast. Because live, it would simulate the computer being blown to smithereens. Oh my goodness. Then again, it was the same year you had On the Run from Dark Side of the Moon by Pink Floyd, which was also done on a program synthesizer, VCS3 Putney to be exact, which had a sequencer. And Keith Emerson had a sequencer in his Moog, which had a dummy computer with wings build up as the stage billowed with dry ice. On the album, it just cuts off. Live, it just kept going and going and going and going until that computer that rose from the bottom of the stage, which was near Keith Emerson's keyboard setup, sprouted wings, dry ice billowing the stage, and then ends with a pyrotechnic explosion. Oh man. Progressive rock bands knew how to do amazing justice. But that was not all that was recorded for the album, because there were 3 other songs that were recorded that would eventually surface on Works Volume 2. But I'll talk about them anyway, because 2 of the songs would appear on the deluxe edition of Brain Salad Surgery that was released in 2016. although they had already been released on, what was that album? Oh yeah, it was also had already been released on Works Volume 2 back in a few years after Brain Salad Surgery. So the first of these was Tiger in a Spotlight. Everyone's like, oh, that was recorded in 1977. I go, no, it was recorded during Brain Salad Surgery. Because it has that Brain Salad Surgery vibe thing. It didn't have the Yamaha GX7. It was the Polymoog. And it was written by ELP and Pete Sinfield. And this song is a reverse of what they would do with, I'm trying to think. Yeah, what they had done. Normally they would drop songs in a key. Live when they played Tiger in a Spotlight on the 1977-78 Works tour without the orchestra. A live version appears on Works Live. Greg Lake, the band, would perform the song in the key of G. Excuse me, the studio version's in F, which is nice, and has Greg Lake on lead guitar, bass, playing in my face, pounding the elastic, drums, listen as you come, hammer in the plastics, keys, being on the knees, freeze, you're shaking up the knees, doing something Jurassic, chasing the fantastic, ride the tigers in the sky. Did you ever stop to wonder why? Oh my goodness. This song, I actually dig it. And this song, be it the studio version that it's on Works Volume 2, or the live version that's on Works Live, and the reason, like, it's not on Brain Salad Surgery. I'm like, well, it was recorded during the sessions for the album, but was held off the album due to time constraints of the vinyl record. So the band had to make a few sacrifices. So this song was ex-nayed, but luckily it was saved for future use. But I think a great song nonetheless. I love Tiger in a Spotlight. An overlooked gem in the ELP catalog. Now we get to a song that was released on a maxi single in the UK, but was not on the original album here in the States. When the apple blossoms bloom in the windmills of your mind, I'll be your Valentine. Written by all three members of the band. This instrumental is just a nice jamming workout between the three ELP guys. The band just jamming away, and this song was in contention to be on the album. That was in the event of Toccata being rejected, so they had a few songs in the can just in case Toccata was rejected. And then the band was like, well, we want to put this on, we love this song, but we cannot fit it on here because of, again, time constraints of vinyl LP. So what did the band do? Well, very, very simple. The band waited until 1977 to put this song, this instrumental, on the Works Volume 2 album, which was a bunch of leftovers from the Works sessions and Brain Salad Surgery sessions and singles released in 1975-76. But yeah, this instrumental, one of the finest ELP instrumentals, but I can see why they went with Toccata rather than this. This is nice, but compared to Toccata, this is kind of filler, but filler that's killer. That's all I'm going to say about this tune. Now we get to the other outtake from the album, which would have been on the album, but the band decided not to put it on the album of the same name. But it was released as a promotional single, the title track. You're like, Brain Salad Surgery had a title track? Yeah, the song was, the band did a song called Brain Salad Surgery, which was intended for the album of the same name, but the band decided in the end not to put it on the album. And the lyrics are, Brain salad surgery, it will murder you, it murdered me. We made it for our enemy. Brain salad surgery, we've got about a salad brain where the surgeon's in a dirty bit of gain. Brain salad surgery, it will work for you, it works for me. Brain rot perversity, brain salad surgery, we've got about a salad brain where the surgeon's in a dirty bit of gain. Oh my goodness. And I believe this song was released as a single, if I'm not mistaken. And yeah, the song was released as a promotional single to radio. So this song was left off the album but released as a promo single a few years before it would surface on the Works Volume 2 album. Luckily, the band had the good foresight to include this as a bonus track on various different reissues of the Brain Salad Surgery album, and also on the deluxe edition of Brain Salad Surgery released in 2016. And this song was the A-side to Still You Turn Me On, which was the flip side. Everyone's like, what? I go, yeah, I'm on Discogs right now looking at this darn thing. So yeah, the title track to Brain Salad Surgery was left off the album, but was released as a promotional single in early 1974 with Still You Turn Me On as the flip side. Because if Still You Turn Me On had been released, Brain Salad Surgery would have been an on-album B-side. So yeah, it was released during the time frame of the album of the same name, but because of time constraints of vinyl records, it was not used. But the band thought highly of enough to include on the Works Volume 2 album and various different remastered reissues of this album since 1974. And that's all that was recorded for the Brain Salad Surgery album. And when this album was released, the album continued the band's winning streak, as the album, I believe, peaked at number 11 on the Billboard album chart, if my memory serves me correctly. We do know it went gold. It shipped gold in November of 73 and has gone platinum by now. And yeah, Brain Salad Surgery was the pinnacle of Emerson, Lake and Palmer's career as far as success goes. The album peaked at number 2 in the band's native England, but here in the States, it peaked at, it peaked at number 11. And the tour in support of the album was called the Brain Salad Surgery Tour. Some called it the Get Me a Ladder Tour, but it was called the Brain Salad Surgery Tour. And the band toured from October 1973 all the way into the summer of 1974. And this whole album, Brain Salad Surgery, the album itself, was played every night. They played the whole album, except one of the tunes would be alternated with another song, which I'll bring up from the live document, or one of several live documents from the tour that was released officially. So yeah, the band toured in support of the Brain Salad Surgery album starting in November of 73 and it went into August of 74, and it comprised of the first leg was from November 14 to just before Christmas, December of 73. Then the second leg was from January to April 74, then a European leg in spring 74, and then a final summer leg in July 74. And during the tour to support the album, the band threw in some new theatrics, including Carl Palmer's rotating drum kit, which was made out of stainless steel. It weighed, the bass drum took 2 people to carry, and was made by British Steel because Ludwig would not build a stainless steel kit for Carl. So he had British Steel and Gretsch make the kit for him. And of course the cymbals were still Paistes. Carl's always used Paiste from the get-go. Gretsch and Premier drums with Paiste cymbals, and the drum casings were made from British Steel and engraved with woodland creatures like foxes and peacocks and hedgehogs and all that fun stuff. And also 2 gongs, timpanis, tubular bells, and a church bell, which he gnawed with his teeth during his drum solo, and then told during a few other parts of the show. He had that. Greg Lake debuted, had his 6-string Zemetis electric guitar that he finally debuted for the Americans, because up until then he was using a Gibson Les Paul for when he played electric. And he did away with the double neck Zemetis because it was too problematic, so he used the Fender Precision bass for the first part of the tour, and then he had a Gibson, I forgot what model bass. And then he also had the Zemetis 12-string acoustic for Still You Turn Me On, a Gibson 6-string for Lucky Man, and the Zemetis 6-string for Tarkus, Toccata, and Carnival 9. And Keith Emerson, his keyboard rig, several mini Moogs, a poly Moog, the Moog Beast, 2 Hammond organs, one of which he would ride at the end of the show during Pictures at an Exhibition, which was the encore for the tour. Everyone's like, I thought it would be Rondo. I'm like, nope, it was Pictures at an Exhibition, or side 2 of the album was the encore. And then for some shows, Keith Emerson was playing a grand piano that flew in the air and flipped upside down, spun around, and him playing it. I'm serious. There's footage of it from, what was that? The Cal Jam, where he's doing that. The Cal Jam footage, which was filmed in April 74, shows ELP live at the pinnacle of their success. And, Carl Palmer with his drum kit, the quadraphonic sound, which was just, oh man. ELP and Pink Floyd were the 2 bands that pioneered in quadraphonic sound in concert. Pink Floyd may have started it, but ELP also jumped on the quadraphonic bandwagon, especially with the drum solo in quad. Unbelievable. And then the band decided to not only film one of the shows, but record one of the shows for a triple live album that came out at the end of August 1974. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, ladies and gentlemen, Emerson, Lake and Palmer, which was recorded at the Anaheim Convention Center in February 1974. And that live album was recorded first for King Biscuit episode, and there's a recording of that out there. The edited program is out there on CD, but the full show was released as the Welcome Back, My Friends triple live album. And this live album is one of my all-time favorite live albums in history. And to Paul Stanley and Gene Simmons, who said live albums were death before alive, ELP, to their credit, had their highest charting album with a live album in this country, for your information, Paulo and Gino. And also, the critics hated ELP more than they hated Kiss. So stick that in your trophy case, Paul Stanley. And unlike Kiss Alive, Welcome Back, My Friends was warts and all live. No overdubs, no nothing. And it was pretty much what you got was what you got. The only effects that were added were echo effects done in the mixing. But it was recorded. What you got on the night was what you got on the night. And the songs on Welcome Back, My Friends, the show that never ends, ladies and gentlemen, ELP, were, let's see, all the songs from Brain Salad Surgery were played, except for, including Benny the Bouncer Benny the Bouncer was ixnayed from the album, as was the encore, which was Pictures at an Exhibition, but the rest of the show was, basically, the rest of the show was on this triple live album. So it began with a frantic version of Hoedown. Then you had Jerusalem Live, which was great. Toccata Live, which Carl had his, I don't know what's better, studio version or live version. The live version has its merits. Studio version has its merits. Either way, Toccata was great. Tarkus. Originally 20 minutes in the album, it was extended to 27 minutes on this album. On the original vinyl, it took up a side and a half of a record. And, of course, Tarkus was extended with, extended keyboard solos on Stones of Years and Mass, where Keith Emerson shot that ribbon synthesizer going, mee, 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 and Carl's going batty on the drums, Greg Lake going, and then all of a sudden, Greg Lake switches to the Zameda 6-string electric guitar for the Battlefield section, and that section ends with a excerpt of King Crimson's Epitaph from their first album, In the Court of the Crimson King. To me, the best King Crimson album ever made. They didn't top it. So after Greg Lake sings, in the end there will be very little sorrow, very little pain, he goes into Epitaph, which was great. Confusion will be my epitaph as I crossed a cracked and broken path. If we make it, we can all sit back and laugh. And then ends with the guitar harmonics. And then goes into the Aqua Tarkus section, which was extended to almost 10 minutes. and it featured a lengthy quote from Dick Hyman's 1969 novelty single, The Minotaur, as Greg Lake and Carl Palmer were anchored at gung 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 gung, and Greg Lake going gung 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 gung. Oh my goodness! they're like, sheesh. Okay, Keith, enough of this keyboard stuff. We're being stuck here playing this gung gung. And Carl's like, screw it. I'll just keep going gung 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 boom boom. And Greg's like, oh my goodness, I'm anchored playing 6 minutes of gung gung while Carl at least is having fun just beating the crap out of his drums. Oh my god. Then you had Take a Pebble from the first album, Still You Turn Me On from the then new Brain Salad Surgery, and then Lucky Man, which apparently it was sped down low. The version that's on the album is a semitone lower than how it was performed on the tour. So it turns out, because I've listened to bootlegs from the Welcome Back from the Brain Salad Surgery tour, and the version of Lucky Man was slowed down for the album. You're like, was that overdubbed? I'm like, no, they just slowed the tape down to make it sound like he was performing it in C sharp. It was actually performed in D. Watch the footage from Cal Jam, listen to any bootleg, Providence, Boston Garden, Madison Square Garden. That's the proof right there. Then you had the piano improv, which had some fugue thrown in by Keith Emerson, which was great. And then you had, I'm trying to think, a medley of two of the hilarious tunes that the band did, Jeremy Bender and the Sheriff, which was great. I love that medley. It's good when they do these little medleys to give the fans a little curveball. And then, of course, Disc 3, Vinyl Record 3, was taken up by all three movements of Carn Evil 9, which, of course, like I said, was done in a different key, except for First Impression Part 2, which was in the key it was recorded, and the Second Impression, which was in the key it was recorded, and the Hammond organ solo and Third Impression was in the key it was recorded, but everything was lowered from A flat to F for these live versions. But, of course, that was extended because after Greg Lake did the third roll up, see the show, Carl Palmer had to do a little extra drum fill so Greg Lake could switch guitars from his Gibson bass to his Zameda 6-string electric guitar, then the organ swell. I've already talked about it, but I figured I'd share upon it again. Then Greg Lake would be rocking out the guitar on the electric guitar as he sang Welcome Back, My Friends, that section. Amazing performance. And then Carl Palmer's spastic drum solo where he just went completely to town. I don't know what version's better, studio or live. They're both great. But if I'm forced to pick a gun point, I kind of lean towards studio, but the live gives it a run for its money. And that's how the album ends. And, of course, there were a few other songs that didn't make the album, which was Pictures at an Exhibition, because it had already been released as a live album. Rondo was played at a few shows, but didn't make the cut either. And Benny the Bouncer was played, but again, the band left that off the album on the cutting room floor. The album, when it was first released, became ELP's highest charting album here in America, peaking at number 4 on the Billboard album chart, the highest position of any ELP album ever. Their highest charting studio album was Trilogy, but Welcome Back, My Friends was their highest charting album, period. And for a triple live album, that was great showing in 1974. And the album was shipped gold, has gone platinum by now. But yeah, so much for Kiss saying, "Oh, live albums were death." What about Deep Purple Made in Japan? Oh yeah, that was 2 years before Alive. That was all live, warts and all. That was their biggest, highest charting album in America. So shush, Gino, old boy. And Welcome Back, My Friends also duplicated that feat. So there goes the myth that live albums were death before Kiss Alive. I love Kiss Alive, don't get me wrong, but I think it's overrated as a live album. Terrence did not just say that. Oh, hell yes, I did. Like I said, I enjoy it, but I'm kind of burned out on its ranking. I mean, there's many other live albums that are better than Alive by Kiss. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Seconds Out. Bursting Out. Live After Death. Yeah, I said it. What else was a better live album? Pulse from Pink Floyd, obviously, because I'm a Floyd fanatic. Paris Supertramp, Caught in the Act, Live by Styx. Eagles Live. Yeah, so there's many live albums I hold in higher regard than Kiss Alive. Terrence has lost his mind. No, I haven't. But yeah, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. The live album from the tour, you know. Perfect document of ELP at the top of their game. Excuse me. And then there were a few surprises on some shows of the tour, like when they sang Silent Night at Madison Square Garden just before Christmas '73. But yeah, Brain Salad Surgery, welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, was ELP at the pinnacle and the height of their success. And they did take a few-year break, but things would change because of a thing called punk. God, it's just like when grunge overtook metal. Punk killed prog in the same way that grunge killed metal. Everyone's like, oh, grunge didn't kill metal. I'm like, well, from a commercial standpoint, it did. And yeah, it did weed out the sissy bands from the real bands. But ELP did survive. Because when they reformed in the 80s with another P, Cozy Powell, I'll save that story for another day. But in recent news of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, we lost Keith Emerson in March 2016 when he took his own life because he was suffering from depression and was dealing with nerves in his arms because he had to have Tommy John surgery, as baseball pitchers called, to repair the nerve in his right forearm. He took his life at the age of 71 years old. He would have been 72. You know, it's a damn shame. Mental illness is a killer. So we lost Keith Emerson in March 2016. And then we lost at the end of December Greg Lake to pancreatic cancer. Damn cancer to hell. And he had just turned 70 years old. So this review is respectfully dedicated to the memories of both Keith Emerson and Greg Lake, and also to H.R. Geiger, the man who did the album sleeve. May God grant you three mercy and eternal peace. And as for Carl Palmer, he's still touring now with his band playing the music of ELP, and he's actually doing an ELP tribute tour, where he's playing along footage of Keith and Greg from the Royal Albert Hall, kind of keeping the thing alive. It's not a hologram. It's actually Keith and Greg on the screen from the outtakes of the Royal Albert Hall gig from '92 with Carl playing live drums to it, which to me I think is much better than a stinking hologram anyway. And everyone's like, are you nuts? I'm like, no, I think it's great that Carl's keeping the ELP banner alive. And then speaking of ELP reissues, an Emerson, Lake and Palmer box set will be released in November. On the 9th of November, a ELP box set of CDs, the first 5 CDs will be released on November the 10th. It's called, if I'm not mistaken, just bear with me, I'm on Amazon here for a moment. The box set is called, so on November 10th, the first 5 ELP albums will be released as a 5 CD box set called Emerson, Lake and Palmer, the original albums, which brings together the current remastered versions of the first album, Tarkus, Pictures at an Exhibition, Trilogy, and Brain Salad Surgery, packaged in mini LP sleeves. And it's available now on Amazon.com or wherever you buy your music. And if you didn't want to splurge for the deluxe editions, because some people don't like hearing 20 different versions of the same song, and you just want the remastered albums solo, this is your best bet to get all 5 of those albums and save a bit of money. Because if you buy the deluxe editions, it's like $24, $48, $72, $96, $120. So you'd be saving A good $70 if you buy this Emerson Lake and Palmer 5 CD box set called Emerson Lake and Palmer Original Albums Box Set. Maybe there'll be a volume 2, who knows. But for now, that's my look at ELP, and I'm going to recommend the said 2 CD deluxe edition of Brain Salad Surgery. If you can find the surround sound mix on DVD, I'd go for it. The 1996 remaster is nice and all, but those interviews were kind of done separately and kind of shoddy, in my opinion. So it's like my least favorite reissue. My favorite interview, which I based much of this review on, was the interview they did with Redbeard back in 1992 on an episode of In the Studio with Redbeard. And that's the best interview about the making of the album, because you get the whole story, including the songs that about the songs in the album, and some of the funny stories about the gigs, the album cover, etc., etc. And I'm also going to recommend the Welcome Back, My Friends, to the Show That Never Ends live album and CD as well. So if you don't know where to go for live ELP, this is definitely it. And if you love this live album, just dig deep and go for the other live documents like Works Live, Olympic Stadium 77. Oh man. A lot of good to find with the ELP camp. And Emerson, Lake and Palmer, amazing band. Keith Emerson, Greg Lake, and H.R. Geiger. God bless you all. So before I go, here are some plugs for some other radio shows and podcasts I want you cool fans to give an eye and ear to, and I will be right back. I'm going to recommend some radio shows and podcasts. Rock Talk with Mitch LaFon, Chris Jericho Podcast, Y2J for the Win, Eddie Trunk Podcast, and the Raconteurs with Guy Pratt and Gary Kemp from Nick Mason's Saucer Full of Secrets. Also going to recommend the following YouTube channels. Professor of Rock. His channel always wins. John Bodin and his classic rock channels on YouTube. He's also awesome. Mike Noland and his classic rock channels. Always great to watch his videos. He tells it like it is, or it was. And he's one boomer that kicks, to quote the Marine Corps, recon ass, ooh-rah. Or as they say in the Marine Corps, ooh-rah. God bless the Marines. God bless the military. Melinda Murphy, despite the fact she's attached to one of my enemies, I leave nameless. Also, thank you to Brandon Snyder. His channel, always awesome. Lazarus' YouTube channel. Classic Rock Review with Barry. Another great channel. Darren Locke. How can anyone hate Darren Locke? It's humanly impossible. And lastly, my favorite, Pete Pardo, Sea of Tranquility, in his various videos, In the Prague Seat, Hudson Valley Squares, you name it. His channel, always awesome. His videos always rule. And, yeah, and Pete, I can say this from the bottom of my heart. Your Mets did deserve that World Series back in 1986 when that ball went through Bill Buckner's legs. So I am a humble man saying, yeah, our Red Sox dropped the ball literally. And your Mets were the better team that year. So before I go, here's some plugs for other podcasts and radio shows I want you cool fans of mine to give your love to. And to quote General MacArthur, I shall return.
Mistress Carey reporting for duty. That's right, after rocking the airwaves in Boston for 22 years on WAAF, welcome to the Mistress Carey podcast. And if you love rock, this weekly podcast is for you. I'll introduce you to new bands that I think you are going to love and keep you in touch with the bands that are already your favorites. I'll take you backstage and expose you to the people behind the rock. Plus, we'll talk about everything else that we know and love, like motorcycles, tattoos, skydiving, hot rods, food, booze, and so much more. And let's not forget all of the branches of our military, our veterans, and first responders. Everything you know and loved about the Mistress Carey show, but now I'm unfiltered and uncensored. Fuck yeah! And if you never heard me before, well, welcome to the party. Subscribe now so you don't miss Mistress Carrie Podcast.
Please state the nature of the medical emergency.
Brain damage with Pink Floyd.
This stuff can give you brain damage.
Pink Floyd radio show.
Use only as directed.
There is no downside to the moon, really. Matter of fact, it's all
Your controls are set to the Random Precision Radio Network. This is Floody and Slip, an hour of Pink Floyd. I'm Craig Daly. Find us online at floodyanslip.com. Write to us at pink at floodyanslip.com. Floody and Slip is a Random Precision production.
You're listening to Nights with Alice Cooper. I think my Speedo is starting to cut off the flow of oxygen to my head. And that's why I got so
temperamental with anyone who has the impertinence to question his wisdom, and hello, out pops his inner courier.
Hi, and welcome to In the Studio. Redbeard here with the stories behind history's greatest rock and roll albums.
You're welcome. Guitar up. 1, 2, 3.
Follow In the Studio on Facebook, at Redbeard Rocks on Twitter, and online at inthestudio.net.
Well, my friends, the show that never ends has to come to an end for now, as Terrence has to say goodbye. But come back next episode, and I will have a From the Vault episode on Quadrophenia by The Who. This is the original recording I did back in 2018 to 2022, but with some updates to make it as current as possible, so I won't have you all leaving hanging in the wind of like, when's Terrence going to do another episode? Well, it's going to be sooner than you think. And also coming soon, A Night at the Opera by Queen will be re-aired with some new modifications, and a few re-records and some new episodes. New episodes on various different topics. Yeah, Kiss Destroyer, which I've been working on for the last few years, will finally be finished. Eagles on the Border for that album's golden anniversary. I'll have a Genesis episode, Pieces of 8 from Styx along the way. So a lot of classic albums coming soon on Terrence's Classic Rock Corner. So for now, this is the Classic Rock Brainiac, Terrence Reardon. Thank you all for listening. I love you all. God bless Keith Emerson. God bless Greg Lake. God bless H.R. Geiger. And God bless you all.
Terrence's Classic Rock Corner podcast was written, edited, produced, so forth and so on by yours truly, the Classic Rock Brainiac, Terrence Reardon. The intro and outro music is Confrontation by Craig Seafan, taken from the film soundtrack to the movie Thief. Copyright 2023, TJR Rocksponge Incorporated, all rights reserved. Once again, thanks for listening and or watching. I love you all. Good night. God bless you.